Christopher, thanks for joining us. A complex area. I know we can only kind of touch on the main points, but a lot of couples use income splitting. Say one spouse stays at home, doesn't work outside the home, the other has a career or a business, but they split the income to bring down the tax brackets. But if you divorce, what does that just blow that arrangement out the window?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. Just going back to basics, income in a divorce proceeding is relevant when we're talking about the issues of child support and spousal support, right? The higher your income is as a payer spouse, the higher the support amounts that you're going to be paying here. So when we're trying to minimize our taxes by splitting income, what we're really doing is saying to the CRA, look, my income's not as high as it really is. For family law purposes, it gets a little more complicated than that, because what the court's going to consider is, what do you as the payer spouse have the ability to make? So if you're splitting some of that income with your spouse, that really is the income in the paying spouse's hands. So it's fine for CRA purposes, but it gets a little dicier when you're talking about family law purposes.
And hang on, I might have lost you there. So say I have a regular income splitting, a spousal RSP or whatever strategy I've done, and I divorce, and assuming I'm the one who has the income from outside the house, does that arrangement is no longer available to us if we divorce?
Yeah, so we're talking about spousal RSPs, for instance. I know you just brought that up, where one spouse is contributing to an RSP that's going to be in the other spouse's name. Obviously, you're going to discontinue that, because if you're divorcing, you're not going to be, providing funds in an RSP to your spouse. So that is gone. But that RSP is subject to division, right? Like, it is in the recipient spouse's hands. So that spouse is going to have an asset that needs to be divided as part of the equalization or property division process. What I was referring to, Andrew, is more about income splitting in the sense of, you have a business here where you might be, putting off some of that income over to a spouse, just to minimize the taxable income that the business owner has, to try to reduce taxes that way.
You say one big misconception here is equating a person's income with their taxable income?
Yeah, exactly. And the key to remember there, Andrew, is that what's permissible for CRA purposes doesn't always fly for family law purposes. The example I like to give is, we've got real estate agents out there that might be bringing in $500,000 worth of commissions over the course of a year. Now, obviously, if you look at their tax returns and you look at their statement of professional, income, and you can see that they start reducing things off. Like, they'll write off meals and expenses. They'll write off, portions of their house that they use for a home office. They'll write off their vehicle. They'll write off their gas. Now, all of that is perfectly legitimate for CRA purposes. And tax minimization, as long as it's legal, is a great thing to do. But when we're in a family law proceeding and you're in a divorce, what a judge and what a court can do is they will look at those deductions that a self-employed person has taken, and they'll say, was this necessary to earn the income? That's the first question. And the second question they'll ask is, was there a personal component to this? So let's go back to the real estate agent, not to pick on real estate agents, but insurance and things like that, absolutely, that's a necessary expense. Having a vehicle is even a necessary expense. Where it gets a little dicey is when they try writing off the entire vehicle, because there's going to be a personal component to that. The court's going to say, you needed a vehicle anyways. I'm not going to allow you to write off 100% of that vehicle.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll ascribe a proportionate share. They'll say half the car was used for business purposes, and they'll write off, and they'll give you the deduction for half, as opposed to maybe all of the car that the person wrote off on their tax return. Same with the meals and expenses. The court's going to say, you've got to eat. So does somebody earning a T4 income. They've got to eat as well. We're not going to allow you to reduce your income when we're considering your income for support purposes in that scenario.
Now, sometimes a forensic accountant has to be brought in. Why? In what circumstance would that happen?
Yeah, and we really only bring on forensic accountants or sometimes chartered business valuators when the situation is really messy and there's, in a forensic accountant, where there's movement of money from, one account to another over many, many, many years, and it's hard to trace. We do like to use chartered business valuators. They're experts that we bring on that they'll assess the situation. They'll look at the facts. They'll look at all the disclosure, and they will say, in our opinion, having looked at all of this information, what is this spouse's income for support purposes. And it's a really, really good tool to have in your pocket, because sometimes, they know, for instance, what to look for. They know how to gross up a number of expenses that might have been unreasonably deducted and things like that. So we bring them on when the situation gets a little more complicated, usually when there's a more complex scenario involving the spouse's income.
Give us another complication. I mean, I've heard divorce called a recipe for poverty. I guess people should think long and hard before they go. I mean, it really can devastate your finances. But, well, give us your reaction to that. I mean, it can be really financially damaging, can't it, divorce?
Yeah, I mean, divorce is one of those things where even if you set aside the legal fees, you set aside, like the heartache and everything, you're losing. If you had a double income household, you're losing a double income, and now you've got double the expenses. You've got to separate your households. So, even without any fight at all, there's going to be an effect on your personal finance there. But then when you factor in messy divorces or people that are in court and they've got to start, paying their lawyers tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to work out, their issues between them. It's not uncommon to see people draining, a lot of what they've saved up for and worked for throughout the years. And it really is a sad sight. I never want to see that. I always like to try to come to an amicable or solution that makes sense. Yeah. And I think most lawyers are able to do that. It's just sometimes when there's such an entrenchment in positions that it's just not feasible, then there's no choice but to go to court. And that's where it really starts getting financially draining.